At 4 a.m. on Friday, October 10th, hours after Stephanie and Kitty made their escape, law enforcement converged around Barker Ranch. They included the California Highway Patrol, the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, and the National Park Service. Park Ranger Dick Powell's wife also was there to help with the children. Before dawn, the officers snuck onto the property. The first two people they saw, Clem and 15-year-old Hugh Todd, were armed sentries. Both males were asleep on the ground, a shotgun beside them. After the arrest of Grogan and Todd, the police moved toward the main ranch house. They encountered Kenneth Brown, aka Scotty, dozing on a hill overlooking the house. In the house, officers found 6 women: Squeaky, Katie, Sadie, Gypsy, Leslie, and Little Patty. Each gave false names when arrested, while police continued to Myers Ranch and arrested Oish, Brenda, Sandy, and Diane Von Ahn. The officers also found 3-week-old Ivan and 1-year-old Zizo at Myers. Mrs. Powell took the infants to a waiting vehicle where they were rushed to a local clinic for examination. The women at Myers Ranch showed their scorn by peeing on the ground in front of the arresting officers and talking gibberish, code, to one another. The 10 women, along with Clem, Hugh, and Scotty, were cuffed and transported to the jail in nearby Independence. Several officers remained at Barker Ranch to continue searching for evidence of stolen goods and arson. Suddenly, Kitty and Stephanie, out all night, lost in circles, crept from behind the sagebrush and begged the officers to assist them. They told them that the family was dangerous, maybe murderous, and they were desperate to get away from them. Both were taken into protective custody, and although brought to the same jail, were kept away from the others. Kitty and Stephanie called their families from jail, but Kitty was booked regarding the Hinman case. Deputy Sheriff Gleason from LASO had been searching for Luda Singer, and Kitty's mother was frantic to find her daughter. Someone made a call and found Manson. As Charlie later related, one of the kids phoned from jail and caught me at Spawn's. When he first mentioned he was phoning from jail, I had that sinking sensation, but after being told that the charges were auto theft, possession of firearms, and other petty charges, I wasn't alarmed, just irritated at the police for continually fucking with us. On October 12th, police were still at Barker Ranch, looking for evidence. I stuck around LA for another day, gathering supplies and looking for money, Charlie said, then headed back to the Barker place, wondering what it was going to take to get the kids out of jail. From the phone conversation, we weren't suspected of anything other than the charges mentioned. The murders had happened over 2 months ago, and even with Bobby in jail for Hinman's death, the cops hadn't questioned any of us. I was even thinking that, perhaps in my paranoia, I had been a little too heavy on everyone in the last few weeks. Maybe I had gone overboard on stressing the need to be ready to defend ourselves. He continued, I got back to the ranch in the late afternoon. Several kids who had escaped the bust were still in the area. When they saw me, they all came out of hiding and joined me in the house. By the time the sun had gone down, about 8 or 10 of us had been in the house for a couple of hours, and we had lit a candle for light. They were busy telling me what had happened, and I was deep in thought. All of a sudden, up jumped the devil. Freeze! Hands up! All right now, one at a time. Back out the door, shouted the officer who had thrown the door open. I dropped to the floor as soon as I heard the first word, and bellied it into the bathroom. The only refuge possible was a small cabinet beneath the wash basin. Somehow I managed to squeeze inside that cabinet and get the door shut. I was so cramped, it was almost a relief when about 10 minutes later, the door was opened and a voice said, All right, you, out of there. It seems that when I had closed the door, some strands of my hair were visible. Had it not been for that hair sticking out, the officer later stated that he would not have looked in that cabinet because it seemed too small to hide in. Charles Milles Manson, 34 years of age, was arrested on charges of arson, of possessing stolen vehicles and weapons. His emergence from that little cupboard was his last breath of free air forever. That image, though, of Manson climbing out of a tiny cabinet was usurped later by prosecutor Bugliosi. It's not just that Manson's a lifelong criminal, or a mind-controlling charlatan, or even that he's a murderer. It's the hiding aspect, how Charlie crawled up from beneath a rock like a snake to steal our beautiful, innocent children. This image validates the notion that police couldn't have known what was happening because Manson was being covert, when the truth was quite the opposite. Charlie and the family were in plain sight all along. Their only times in hiding were those last weeks in the desert, and even then, they went into Ballarat and back to Spawn Ranch every week. But for 2.5 years, they had interacted with California elites, spiritual leaders, Hollywood hoi polloi, notable occultists, organized gang members, famous music stars and producers, etc. They were there all along, and still, nobody figured out that this group of hippies had committed some of the most bloodthirsty murders in American history. Arrested between the 3 days, October 10th through 12th, were Bill Van Sickle, aka Bill Vance, arrested as David Lee Hammock; John Philip Haught, aka Zero; Kenneth Brown, aka Scotty Davis, arrested as Robert Ivan Lane; Vern Plumley, arrested as Vern Edward Thompson; Lawrence Giddings, aka Little Larry; Bruce Davis; Diane Lake, aka Snake, arrested as Diane Bluestein; Kathy Gillies, aka Capistrano or Cappy; Sue Bartell, aka Country Sue; Collie Sinclair, arrested as Beth Tracy; Claudia Lee Smith, arrested as Sherry Andrews; Kitty Ludesinger; Diane Von Ahn, arrested as Mary Ann Schwarm; Sandy Good; Nancy Pittman, aka Brenda, arrested as Sidette Perel; Ruth Ann Morehouse, aka Oish, arrested as Rachel S. Morse; Patricia Baldwin, aka Little Patty, arrested as Linda Baldwin; Leslie Van Houten, arrested as Luvella Alexandria; Catherine Scher, aka Gypsy, arrested as Manon Minette; Susan Atkins, aka Sadie, arrested as Donna K. Powell; Patricia Krenwinkel, aka Katie, arrested as Marnie K. Reeves; Lynette Frome, aka Squeaky; Hugh Rocky Todd; Steve Grogan, aka Clem. The only new person in the group was Claudia Lee Smith, an 18-year-old from the Los Angeles area. She would later marry Cowboy Bill. Smith was the last family member to join before the late 1969 arrests and grand jury indictments. The only person not charged during the Death Valley raid was Stephanie Schramm. All of the men arrested on the 12th, including Manson, Van Sickle, and Davis, had been in Los Angeles or Vegas on the days prior. Squeaky and Sue Bartell were the last to arrive at Barker Ranch from Spawn, just in time to get thrown in the clink. The jail in Independence was bursting at the seams, and Sandy was in distress. She was nursing her son at the time she was arrested. An infant suckling at its mother's breast actually keeps the milk flowing. Sandy, who had no idea how long she'd be separated from her son, was in danger of her milk drying up. According to Diane, the baby had been taken away. This was an affront to all of us, Just another way for the pigs to keep us down. We helped Sandy by taking turns nursing at her breasts. It didn't seem unnatural to partake of her baby's food because we were helping her maintain nourishment for one of our own. At the jail, the family behaved very strangely. Ed Saunders wrote, "The brave girls would raise their dresses in the exercise yard. Manson would utter coyote yips, and his disciples would yip in return. Once they asked for peanut butter and honey for a purification rite, whatever that meant." On October 13th, Inyo County Police informed the Devonshire Division of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office that they had Catherine, Kitty, Ludesinger in their custody. Devonshire PD then called homicide detectives Charles C. Gunther and Paul J. Whiteley. Gunther and Whiteley were in charge of the Hinman investigation. They had interviewed Kitty's mother while her daughter was missing. Knowing that in her situation, Kitty was likely to be protective of her boyfriend and want to provide information on his behalf, Gunther and Whiteley hoped to speak to the teen. They first wanted to rule out her involvement, and then they hoped to offer her something for more info. They'd asked Devonshire PD to keep them informed if they learned of her whereabouts. Gunther and Whiteley drove that morning to Independence to pick Ludesinger up. They brought her to the San Dimas Sheriff's Station, where she was then transferred to LA County's Juvenile Hall. Gunther and Whiteley's first interview with Kitty was at Juvie in the afternoon on October 13th. Kitty spoke to the detectives that day for 4 hours and implicated several family members in numerous serious crimes. Kitty told detectives that she overheard a call between Bobby and Sadie, in which Sadie told Bobby, "We screwed up." She said Sadie admitted stabbing a man several times in the leg, and the man fought back and yanked her hair. When asked about the freeloader arson, Kitty told them that Charles Manson, Christopher Jesus, John Philip Hott or Zero, Manon Minette, Gypsy, Diane Bluestein, Snake, and Rachel Morris, Ruth Ann Morehouse, or Awish, were responsible. She also mentioned a grease gun they took from the loader, later identified among the possessions confiscated at Barker Ranch. Kitty said that Brenda rented a Hertz rental car using a stolen credit card, and the car was later abandoned near Barker Ranch. She told the detectives that those who set fire to the freeloader used the stolen car the day of the arson. She also named those responsible for stealing 3 dune buggies and another vehicle, plus the perpetrators of various credit card thefts and burglaries. She told Whiteley and Gunther how bad things were at Barker Ranch. Manson had become a wild man, beating Snake and herself. Charlie threatened to hang people from trees, cut out their tongues. She told them, "When I start thinking about it, I remember how bad it really was, how he just talked about it so much, about snuffing people and torturing them and all kinds of orgies. You get so you just can't listen to it anymore. It really was pretty bad." Kitty was held for several days at Juvenile Hall, then released to her parents. The Inyo police later told Ludesinger they found a death list on Manson during the Barker arrests with her name on it. Kitty told detectives that she believed 2 or 3 women were with Bobby when he stabbed Gary. She named Susan, of course, but also said that she thought one of the women at Hinman's had been a redhead and that maybe Mary had been there as well. Kitty didn't know Mary Bruner very well, and this led to her confusion about the 2 other women in addition to Sadie. Mary was in Wisconsin that October. The cops had 2 redheads in custody in Independence, Squeaky and Snake. But they searched through their records, and during the August raid, Katie gave the alias Mary Scott during her arrest. Gunther and Whiteley conveyed this info to their peers in Independence, who spoke to Squeaky, Snake, and Pat Krenwinkel. All three denied they had been at Hinman's, and the officers believed them. But when the two investigators drove back to Independence to talk to Sadie, she had quite a story to tell them. According to Gunther, the jail was so crowded there was no place to conduct an interrogation. We advised her of her rights. She sat for a few moments in the chair and said, "We went to the house, me and Bobby Beausoleil, under orders to get money. We went there to get money. When she knocked at the door was opened by Gary Hinman, and Gary asked them in the house. They asked Gary to give Bobby some money. Gary refused. Robert Beausoleil became violent. He started a fight with the victim, Hinman, at which time Miss Atkins said she held the victim, Hinman, while the defendant struck the victim in the face with a knife, slashing his face. Miss Atkins said she then used his sweatshirt and a sheet found in the house to clean up the blood. She then went back into the kitchen and made soup for the victim. She then told us that she and Bobby remained in the house for 2 days, and one stayed awake all the time so that Gary couldn't leave the home. She added that at one point, Gary attempted to leave the house and made it to the front door, where she herself restrained him until she could be assisted by Robert. Sadie told the investigators about how Beausoleil stabbed Gary before they left the Hinman home. As they were walking from the patio to the steps, Miss Atkins said she heard a noise from inside, and she remarked to Bobby, "I don't think he is dead," to which Bobby put on a pair of gloves and walked back to the front kitchen window. He climbed through the window, and Miss Atkins heard a voice that she thought was Gary say, "No, Bobby, don't, please." And she thought she heard gurgling sounds, like when a person dies. Bobby then came out the door. He locked the door behind him, and they both walked to Gary Hinman's Volkswagen bus, where Bobby Beausoleil hot-wired the bus, and they left the residence. She also told me that while at the home of Hinman, that she had phone calls, and during those phone calls, she spoke in an English accent and told the callers that Gary had gone to Colorado to see his parents as they were sick. I asked Miss Atkins if she would talk to me in that manner, and she did speak to me with a very Cockney English accent for approximately 1 minute. While Susan gave up nearly all of the details of Hinman's murder, she failed to mention Mary Brunner, Bruce Davis, Danny DiCarlo, or Charles Manson. She credited Bobby for slashing Gary's face, which Manson actually did. Susan waived her rights, but declined to be recorded for the interview. She didn't hold much back. Certainly she said enough to implicate herself, and was quickly dispatched to the San Dimas Sheriff's Station, where she was booked for suspicion of murder. From there, she was driven by van to Los Angeles. It was the end of the road for the girl with big dark eyes who had danced for Charles Manson in the Haight District 2 years before. I was booked into Sybil Brand on October 13, 1969, Susan later wrote. I knew I would never get out.